We're always told to eat your veggies, and most people don't even question this. But in the late 1980s, a group of toxicologists found that by weight, 99.9% of the pesticides within the vegetables that you eat are already naturally occurring. Therefore, they concluded that these synthetic pesticides were insignificant compared to the naturally occurring ones. So when some people remove plants entirely, they report improvements in gut health, autoimmune issues, and brain fog. At first glance, this doesn't make sense. Aren't vegetables filled with nutrients, fiber, and antioxidants that are great for health? Sure, these scientists may have been right in stating that synthetic pesticide residues are insignificant compared to the naturally occurring ones. But now this raises an even deeper question. Were humans ever meant to eat plants in the first place? Every species of animal on this planet has a species-appropriate diet. For example, carnivorous animals like lions, which are meant to eat meat, or herbivores like cows, which are meant to eat grass, and only very specific types of grasses. Whereas true obligate omnivores that need to eat both plants and animals are very, very rare. So where does this leave humans? After all, if an animal doesn't eat its proper diet, it will get very sick. If cows are not fed their proper diet of specific types of grasses, they will also get human diseases like cancer and diabetes, even if they are still eating plants. This is because the biology of all species is different, and for ruminant animals, their physiology allows them to properly break down the nutrients and, more importantly, anti-nutrients within those plants. So what are anti-nutrients? All plants create chemicals to defend themselves. Yes, even the vegetables that you eat. All living things on this planet need some form of defense so that they can live and reproduce. Given that plants can't move like animals can, they must rely on chemical warfare. If you were to just walk out into a forest right now and start eating any plant that you see, you wouldn't last very long. Here are just 49 from the paper I referenced earlier that they identified in cabbage back in 1990. And these are only the ones that they identified, not the potentially hundreds or thousands of others. Even the small amount that we do know of can have a significant impact on the body. Oxalic acid binds to calcium and turns into oxalate crystals, which are like little shards of glass and can accumulate in the body. They can lodge themselves almost anywhere in the body, like your joints, and are the number one cause of kidney stones. Lectins, which are known to wreak havoc on the gut itself, leading to digestive issues and potentially leaky gut, where essentially the tight junctions in your gut start to open up, allowing larger molecules to slip through into your bloodstream. Phytic acid, which can bind to minerals, preventing their absorption. As you can see, this is just a small handful of known anti-nutrients, and many or all can be present in a single plant, creating a negative compounding effect. But there are ways that you can significantly reduce or eliminate them completely. Our ancestors intuitively knew that if plants were eaten, they needed to be prepared in a certain way. Take a tomato for example. Hundreds or even thousands of years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, a tomato never would have been eaten the way it is today. The seeds would be scooped out first, because they're the most toxic part of the plant. After all, they're essentially the plant's offspring. The skin would be removed since it acts as a protective barrier and contains a large portion of the plant's anti-nutrients. Only the flesh would be left, and even then, it was almost never eaten raw. It would be slowly cooked, which further reduced the remaining anti-nutrients. It was very rare that plants would ever be eaten raw like they are today. Sure, there may be some nutrients in the seeds or skin, but this usually doesn't counteract the systemic negative effects of the anti-nutrients. So if plants are eaten, they should be soaked, cooked, fermented, seeded, peeled, or all of the above. And although this does help a lot, this does not get rid of all of the anti-nutrients. So there is an even better way to avoid them, which I will touch on later in the video. Also, if you want the core 7 principles that I use to regulate my own biology, more than just nutrition, you can grab them for free in the description below. So what about fruit? After all, most plants that create fruit have evolved to do this so that an animal will eat it, digest it, and once it's excreted from the body, it is essentially spreading the plant seed. Given this, there are actually less plant toxins within fruit, but does this mean that you should eat them? We still have strong sweet taste receptors because during times of starvation, fructose, one of the main sugars in fruit, would be noticed as a quick safe hit of energy that could have been advantageous to our survival if food was running low. Not to mention that fructose can be 7 to 10 times more glycating than regular glucose, and fructose is broken down to the same byproducts as alcohol in the liver. This is why even children nowadays are developing non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Tens of thousands of years ago, if a human did find fruit, it might have been as sweet as a carrot. Not only this, it was seasonal and rarely found, also almost completely non-existent during the Ice Ages. They have also been selectively bred to be drastically larger and sweeter than anything our ancestors ever would have found, and it's not just the fruit that has been selectively bred, but vegetables like broccoli are basically just selectively bred weeds, meaning nothing remotely close to our modern day vegetables even existed for the majority of our evolution as humans. But if this is the case, why do so many nutritional studies show that vegetables are so beneficial for humans? After all, most of these studies do claim to show that vegetables lower risk of modern diseases and mortality. So what's going on here? These studies are essentially observational surveys, asking people what they ate over the past weeks or months, which is extremely unreliable. Not to mention the biggest elephant in the room, confounding factors. Confounding factors are the other factors that can influence the results of the data. For example, if the general population is always told that vegetables are healthy, the ones who eat more vegetables are also less likely to smoke, drink alcohol, eat fast food, and are far more likely to get better sleep, exercise, and just be more health conscious in general. This is called the healthy user bias. But even if we take this data at face value, what is it actually comparing? These studies are essentially comparing a diet higher in whole foods like meat and vegetables to a standard American diet loaded with fast and processed foods. So yes, it is very likely that a diet higher in whole foods with vegetables is healthier than a standard diet loaded with pizzas and chips. But this only tells us that mediocre diets are better than very bad diets. It doesn't tell us what is optimal for the human body. This type of data can show correlations, but it cannot establish cause and effect, especially when strong confounding factors are at play. Even the authors of these studies typically acknowledge these limitations. So, if observational nutrition data has these flaws, what should we look at instead when trying to understand what humans are actually built to eat? Well, to start, we can just look at our own physiology. If we just look at the stomach, herbivores, animals meant to eat plants, have a stomach acid pH of around 4 to 6. This relatively less acidic environment allows plant material to pass through to be fermented by bacteria later in the gut. Humans, on the other hand, our stomach acid pH is around 1.5, and this isn't just closer to a carnivore's pH level, but it is even more acidic than almost any other animal in the animal kingdom, clearly not conducive to breaking down and fermenting plants. Take a gorilla for example. Not only do they have a stomach acid pH of around 3 to 7, but they are hindgut fermenters, meaning they have a large cecum, specifically designed for bacteria to break down and ferment plants, which are then converted into usable energy, largely in the form of saturated fat. In humans, this is far smaller. Even relative to the size of our bodies, it doesn't even function as a proper cecum, as a part of it, the appendix, is essentially a vestigial organ. And speaking of the size of our guts, they are extremely small compared to the size of our brains. This is where the expensive tissue hypothesis comes into play. Given our brains are so large and energy dense, especially compared to our guts, our bodies require a highly bioavailable, energy dense fuel source, which can realistically only come from animal foods and not plants. Hindgut fermenters like gorillas can spend all day eating plants and slowly converting that energy into fat. Humans, we don't have the gut size, time, or physiology to do this, making plants a likely suboptimal fuel source. Now, some may argue that humans are omnivores simply because we can eat plants, but being able to survive on a food is very different from being biologically optimized for it. This is likely more of just a survival mechanism during times of starvation. Not to mention that dietary carbohydrates, which are generally found in plants, are completely non-essential for humans. But it's not even just the biological or physiological aspects of our bodies that can make plants suboptimal. it's also the psychological aspect. Now, compared to junk food like a pizza for example, whole food vegetables or a salad, for the most part, are likely to be a better alternative. So, if most people see the only two options as either a salad or a pizza, most people are more likely to pick the pizza, mostly because the vegetables taste bad, which is also just a mechanism of anti-nutrients, and usually wouldn't be as satiating. But if more people realize that, say, a steak, for example, is actually far more nutrient-dense, biologically aligned source of food compared to a salad, far more people would be likely to choose a steak over pizza relative to salad. And this is why when people eat only fatty meat and avoid plants, they're easily able to regulate how much they eat, because your hunger signaling hormones like ghrelin and leptin are now being regulated properly by your body. Before processed food, modern nutrition, and dietitians, our ancestors didn't need anyone to tell them to go for meat over plants. It is deeply ingrained into our biology and instincts. The main problem with processed food is that it is engineered to bypass these instincts, creating an irresistible combination of fat, carbs, and salt that never would have been available to us for the majority of our evolution. So where does this leave us? Were humans ever meant to eat plants? Although humans can eat plants, this doesn't mean it is optimal, especially in the context of processed food, which is usually just processed plants with a bit of meat. Fatty red meat on its own is far more aligned with our biology than plants. Now, I'm not saying I never eat plants or that they will make you instantly sick, although they can for some people, but I just never consume them thinking that they were doing me much good. For the most part, I just eat meat from large ruminant animals, mostly beef, as much as I can until I'm fully satiated. After all, there are no nutrients in plants that we must have that we can't get from meat, but there are nutrients in meat that we must have that we can't get from plants. But at the same time, I do understand if you're someone that has always been conditioned that red meat is bad and clogs your arteries, this may sound extremely counterintuitive. If this is you, I highly encourage you to check out this video next, where I break down the whole saturated fat and meat issue that we have been conditioned to believe.